So this started out as a comparison between the Fox GRIP2 and the Ohlins RXF chassis, but the reality is, at my size, the RXF just didn't have the mid-stroke support, and at the PSIs I was running it, I couldn't get the rebounds quite slow enough. So it's not exactly a fair comparison because I was pushing the Ohlins outside of its performance window, again being probably 275-ish, 270, and then I do like a punchy suspension, so I just could never get that feel out of the Ohlins. So I'm not here to say that, yeah, the GRIP2 wins in every condition, but if you're my size and you like punchy suspension, I'll go out on that limb for sure. For lighter riders, the Ohlins is really a good chassis for a lot of people. I know a couple guys in the shop really love it. Joe really likes his. I've never seen Joe not dig into his suspension before. I know Mike, one of our product guys, really likes his Ohlins, but he had to get the ramp up chamber above the suggested PSI in order to get it dialed in, which I didn't have that option running kind of at the top end of all the pressures. So I overlaid some graphics and some ride footage. On the left is the GRIP2, and on the right is the RXF. And even though the GRIP2 is a stiffer fork, you're going to see that it rides more smoothly. The softer fork, believe it or not, looks and did ride more harsh. And that's partly because of the lack of support, and it's throwing itself through its travel, and it's partly because the rebound wasn't able to slow down quite as much as I'd like it. Well, it wasn't able to slow down as much as it needed to. So some other things to take into consideration on this. I felt like not only did the lack of support kind of dive the fork a handful of times in places where I wasn't really sure that it should have, but it also felt like I had to use much more hand input steering, and I had to steer much later into a corner. So on a supported fork, I felt like I could dive the bike in, lean it over, and it would kind of come out of the corner. But if you watch closely on the fork on the right, you're almost seeing more hand input off the beginning and definitely more hand input out of the exit of a corner. So, if you're running your suspension a little too supple, that's some of the things that you might pick up on, which I really saw when I put the footage kind of head to head, and it surprised me a little bit. I really expected to see just the softer fork kind of diving in, and it hung. In fact, the RXF has a really nice high-speed system, and the high-speed, whenever I could get that to engage, it was actually a fairly supportive fork. So anything where I floated in or jumped in, I found that the fork would feel really, really good. And then when I would kind of ride in, it was hit or miss. And then going back and look at the footage, it kind of made a little more sense that, oh, well, I was engaging, the HSC versus the low-speed compression. Now, not exactly a fix for all of your riding. So again, at my size, rather than go in and reinvent the wheel, trying to build a fork that rides like a Fox, I just went out and got a Fox, went that direction with it. There's some differences in the architecture between the two systems. So the Ohlins uses a 3-chamber system. There's a main chamber, there's a negative chamber which fills off the main charge, and then there's the ramp-up chamber. When you set the fork up, you actually set the ramp-up chamber first because that creates pressure on the main chamber and adjusts how progressive your fork feels. Then you ramp into, so you do the ramp up chamber and then you fill the main chamber. On the Fox, it uses volume spacers, which are pretty easy to change in and out for that ramp. Yeah, it's a two chamber system, a positive negative. So through the slow-mo, the bikes are, on the right I come out a little bit ahead, but when you watch it, like coming out of this corner, there's so much hand input, it feels like, versus on the stiffer fork where I'm able to kind of lean the bike and drive off my feet more than having to put in so much hand input. What that turns into, for me, is if you put in tons of hand movement all the time, you risk folding the bike over and kind of going over the bars or launching forward, versus if you can get off your hands and sort of counter steer in and steer off your feet, The bike might slide out when it starts to lose traction, but you can catch that more easily than you can catch kind of a stuttered front where, you know, momentum's trying to pull you over it really fast. Again, relace the two sets of videos together so that they'd be kind of apples and apples. And you can see on the right, it's actually a faster line through that stuff. And then I get into this kind of repetitive woof, woof, woof. And you'll see, I think the left bike catches up through here. So much footage to watch over all of this stuff that you end up forgetting a little bit. But yeah, the more supportive bike changes directions faster and is more confident to carry that speed through the direction change and is able to come out of that corner without as much, you know, manual labor to get it out of the corner. Now on the Fox, I've run the 36 GRIP2 since it came out, and this was actually a 38 GRIP2. The reason I went with the 38 is I wanted the 170 millimeter option on this Mondraker Foxy. I really liked the 170. I didn't notice any real big change one way or the other as far as climbing in particular. Downhill, you know, I haven't gotten it into quite burly enough stuff to need the extra 10 mil of travel, so to speak. But I don't feel like the bike is still handling well. You can tell between the footage that they're real close between the two of them. Again, this is another section where I think you can see a lot of hand input on the softer fork on the right. So, you know, if I was a lighter rider, what I would be looking for out of this is, okay, do I take the ramp up chamber higher in order to get more progressivity out of it? And, you know, slow the rebound down if I had control of that. For my use, I had the rebound maxed and I had everything maxed on there, so just wasn't able to quite get there. The RXF is really plush, and I think a lot of riders do like that aspect to it. It's kind of linear, but again, I wasn't able to go with the ramp up chamber past what I didn't want to run anything past the max PSIs. I don't think that's fair for, you know, me to go and modify a whole bunch of things and then, you know, try to sell it to people like, oh yeah, this works totally great, but you know, you're pushing it well past what it's designed for. On the Fox, I set it up max PSI on the leg, which was 123, and I got pretty good sag out of that. They list that for, I think, 250 pounds. I went and looked at the manual, and you can actually run up to 140 PSI, I believe. It's on page 3 of the manual. I'm running 3 volume spacers in the Fox right now, and I could have up to 5. So I'm tempted to maybe put one more in just to see with a little bit more punch in it, if I like it. It's pretty well balanced. I also changed from the TTX in the rear to the Fox X2. I was having similar issues with the TTX, not so much with the support, although I was running a lot of compression, but the rebound, I just couldn't get the rebound to slow down. Went with the full Fox bike, and for my usage, much preferred. Much, you know, the setup is accurate to what I want it to do. You can see here that the softer bike kind of just barely misses the rocks. There's just a handful of times, and it's not by much. It's close. So again, you know, as far as a review that you're going to take anything from, unless you're my size, riding in similar terrain at similar speeds, what you're looking for out of this is, the setup was doing X, Y, and Z, and I think that's a fair comparison between these two versus trying to compare the actual performance of the equipment. Hopefully you learned something, and you know, if you've got questions on your suspension purchases, make sure that you work with our team. There's nobody better in the industry. And we look forward to seeing you at buyco.com.